Okay, all right.
Red
Okay.
feather.
So we're both filming from, okay.
Can I turn my phone on?
Yeah.
That red feather nestled high in the Christmas tree is an Elif tradition dating back to 1946. Of course, behind every good tradition, you will find a good story. I want to tell you that story, but first, there is another very important I must address. There is nothing more destructive to your life than unresolved bitterness. An unforgiving spirit makes as much sense as drinking poison and expecting someone else to fall over dead. Bitterness is like an acid that eats at a person from the inside out. In fact, an unforgiving spirit is clearly labeled as sin, but by none other than the Lord himself. Yet at this season of the year, as we celebrate the arrival of the one who makes divine forgiveness possible, there are still many whose hearts contain a stored-up supply of hurts from out of their past. For these people, joy is only an illusion, and the Christmas season is more than a little difficult. Out of troubled hearts, they sing Christmas carols about peace with God and man without ever experiencing it themselves. Finding forgiveness in Christ makes it possible for you to extend the same to others. In the process of doing so, you are set free. But how can you forgive after being wounded so deeply? Well, here's the story. In 1946, World War II had come to a close, and our nation was still struggling to pull itself up and back together. For many people, times were still hard and money was short. This was especially true in our small southeastern Arkansas town located in the Mississippi Delta. There, on the weekend following Thanksgiving, our family was decorating the gangly spruce my dad had harvested from the woods nearby. The decorations were as sparse as the tree's branches. On the tree could be found one lone strand of popcorn, carefully threaded by my oldest sister. Along with the popcorn was another chain of multicolored construction paper loops I had carefully glued together with the help of my mother. As a final touch, while we stood in silent wonder, Mother painstakingly layered the tree's branches with store-bought tinsel icicles. I need to mention that during the excitement of the evening, the local pastor's wife stopped by to give my mother a Christmas gift, urging her to open it at once. Inside the beautifully wrapped gift box was an exquisite hat topped by a stunning red feather, telling my mother she would be looking for that hat this coming Sunday. The doctor's wife then departed as quickly as she had arrived. What happened next was the beginning of our tradition. As we stood expectantly beside her, my mother looked at the tree, eyes tightly squinted and lips pursed. "That tree just needs something," she stated matter-of-factly. Holding the hat out in front of her, Mother looked first at the tree and then back at that beautiful hat. Did I mention that ladies of class coveted stylish hats back in those days? Suddenly, in an impulsive gesture of sacrifice and generosity, my mother fiercely yanked the red feather from her brand new hat and placed it high in the tree. "There," she exclaimed, as she stood back gazing at her final touch. "That's just what that old tree needed." My mother's unselfishness and generosity is reminiscent of that time 2,000 years earlier, when God looked down on the cursed world and gave his son to be born of a virgin. You might imagine him saying, as the babe was placed in a manger, "There, That's just what this old world needed. Soon Christmas was over, the tree was down, and our meager decorations were placed for another year in the neat little squares of a grapefruit box rescued for that purpose. Remember those? Little did we know that tucked away safely in that box and stored to rest quietly in the attic for another year, that red feather. Thus the beginning of a tradition. Each year's Christmas saw changes in the decorations and the decorators, but one thing never changed. After telling our red feather story and reading the Christmas account from Luke's Gospel, the feather was placed high in the tree as a silent witness to God's love and forgiveness throughout the Christmas season. My mother's final years saw the ravages of a broken home, a broken heart, and broken health. In her latter years, I once came to town at Christmas to help her put up a little tree in the house where she lived alone. Finding that old grapefruit box, I discovered that the feather, like her home and heart, had been broken apart. Taking the box into the house, I could not help but weep, thinking of all she had endured. But Mother, though now battling a long, insidious attack from Alzheimer's, walked across the room and took her 40-year-old boy in her arms. Usually unable to put two meaningful sentences together, Mother began to pray the most healing, comforting prayer of love, forgiveness, and gratitude I have ever heard. We put the feather back together with tape and placed it in the tree for what proved to be its final Christmas. Following her homegoing and burial, I sat with my sister and two brothers as we reflected on my mother's truly remarkable life. We recalled that out of her experience of true forgiveness in Christ, she was always so eager to forgive others. Forgive, forgive, forgive. That was her immediate response at the mention of any hurtful word or person. She could forgive because she was forgiven. Oh, I do need to tell you that as Mother's meager belongings were divided among her children, each of us really had our eyes on just one thing, the grapefruit box. I forget now who fell heir to it, but I remember that when it was opened, the red feather was gone. The very next Christmas, we each began placing a red feather in our Christmas tree. The tradition lives on. I thought that was a good story.
Yes.
Because I had a red feather that mysteriously appeared.
What?
And I gave Kylene a piece of the red feather. And I gave Ben, you had a piece for Ben. And I'm going to cut these two pieces and I'll keep this one.
Wow.
But isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So when I ran across the red feather story, I thought that was amazing.
Yes. That's
So we
awesome.
each get a red feather. How's
Wow.
that?
That's great.
Yeah, I'll cut
That's
it
wonderful.
before you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
That was cool.
Yeah, that is, Mom. That is
was
an
a nice
awesome.
story.
Uh-huh.
A
What?
true story.
And it's a true story.
It is a true
Yeah.
story.
That's
Yeah.
great. Wonderful.